This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and today, as a special guest, we have former WWE and TNA Impact wrestler Katie Lee Burchill, who is also Winter in TNA. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
Wonderful. The weather's finally getting better here in Canada. How is it in
Uh,
LA?
Same kind of thing. It's been a cold, gray, rainy year for longer than expected. So it's definitely starting to warm up now.
So I understand you're German, but you grew up in the UK. Could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Other way around. I'm British, but I grew up
Oh,
in Germany.
oh, okay.
So yeah, so my parents, they're both English, but they moved to Germany. They both worked at the theater. So my dad was an opera singer. My mom was a ballet dancer. And so they met at the theater, and then they had us. And me and my sisters, we kind of grew up, going to the theater a lot, watching plays, stuff like that. And then when I was about eight or so, me and my elder sister, we went and joined the children's chorus at the local theater. So that's kind of when I started getting the performing bug and everything like that. And up until then, also, and this might become important later, I did a lot of writing as a kid as well. I did a ton of reading. I was always in the corner somewhere, snuggled up with a book. If it was wintertime, I'd be lying underneath the heater reading my book. And I just loved coming up with my own stories, my own poems. And I had some of them published in like the local newspaper. So I was always kind of like gearing towards that creative arts scenario.
Were you around when the Berlin Wall came down?
Yes, I was. I remember that too. It was crazy because we had gone to East Germany before that. A few years before that, me and my family went over to East Germany. But then, partially because probably we had British passports, which was a little bit suspicious, but also my dad had converted a VW, like a bus, like a passenger bus, and he took taken out the seats and he put in like wood paneling and carpet and put benches that could convert into beds and stuff like that. So he made it really nice. But because we were going over to East Germany and lots of people were smuggling stuff back and forth, they made him tear out all the carpet, all the wood paneling to make sure that we weren't smuggling anything in. So as me and my sisters were sitting for hours waiting in the offices, whatever, their little room, drawing pictures for the guards and stuff. And then finally we were allowed to go through it, and then they were like, okay, you can put it all back. Nobody helped my dad. Nobody helped my dad take it out or put it back, but that's kind of like one of the things that I really remember about going over there. And then once the wall had fallen, because I was with that by that time I was with the children's choir chorus at the theater. We actually went into like East Germany once the wall was down, and we did a little tour there in like two or three different cities, and that was really fun as well. Especially everything was so cheap, and there was some little rinkety dink fun fairs, and we went there and went on a ride for like 50 cents, which even in those times were like it was cheap. So yeah, I have like, and I remember like the wall coming down as well, like that being a big event, even though I probably didn't fully understand it at the time, but yeah, that was pretty awesome.
Do you happen to like the Scorpions, the band, by any chance?
Oh yes, that was actually, believe it or not, my very first cassette tape that I bought was Scorpions' Crazy World, which is the album that had Winds of Change, which is a big anthem that came out for the falling of the Berlin Wall. So I had that album on cassette tape. That was one of my very first musical albums I ever bought.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite songs. They're a great band.
Yeah.
As far as growing up in a family that's theatrical and in
Mm-hmm.
the opera, I guess you always had a bit of the acting bug in you
Mm-hmm.
from a child.
Yes, definitely. So we were at the in the children's chorus, and then also at school we had a chorus, and I was in that, and we put on like school musicals and stuff. I actually have a VHS tape for one of our performances where I sing. Believe it or not, I had a few solos to sing. It was like a musical reviews with different songs from films and stuff like that. So yeah, so that was something that I always really enjoyed a lot. Or like if we had plays at school with my school class, I always really enjoyed that. And then after school, I actually studied film and theater at university. This is before I even started wrestling. So that was my original plan, was going to film and theater.
Have you done anything with the actual film studies? Is that for making film or being in film?
I mean, at the time, like the course that I did was mostly for making. We had a little bit of acting here and there, but the main focus of the classes per se was filmmaking. Although, again, bearing in mind this is a long time ago, so we were making short films on Super 8 tape, and we were, the editing was right at the end. As I was about to leave, they started bringing in like computer editing, and it was like an extra course that you could take if you really were interested in editing. So a friend of mine took it. I didn't take it, but we were editing from tape to tape, so it was all very sort of old fashioned. So right after I got out of that, I did do a little bit of acting in London, but then wrestling sort of took over. But I have since then come back to filmmaking. So I've made a few short films, and I'm working on a feature now that I'm developing.
For someone who makes a little bit of film here and there himself, what advice do you have on filmmaking in general?
Oh, it sounds like I don't have any advice to give you. I mean, I would say, first of all, it's like if you really love it, you have to just figure out a way to do it, because it's really hard. If you want to do it really well with the right equipment and all of that, if you don't have the right contacts, or you have people that have that gear, it's easy to sort of fall back into yourself and be like, oh, I don't have the gear, I don't have the money, it's really expensive, I'm not going to be able to do it. But I think that if you really, really have a passion for it, I mean, especially these days, you can do a lot on an iPhone. People are making whole feature films on iPhones. So even if you just write a scene for you and your buddies and you shoot it on an iPhone, just to get practicing and just to do it. And I feel like, okay, not to necessarily quote Tony Robbins, but he likes to say, where focus goes, energy flows. So I feel like if you really put your passion towards something, and also, once you start doing those kinds of things, you will just naturally come across other people who are doing similar things, and you will find your way in, and you will find your way into being more creative. So I guess it's, Nike, just do it.
Yeah, Tony Robbins is a great guy to listen to for motivation.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to him all the time. It's great that we have the internet now. We don't have to actually buy tapes to get advice from people like Tony Robbins or
Right.
attend seminars.
Do you
But
like
as
Jim
you
Rohn?
mentioned, I
Go ahead.
don't even know who that is though.
That's
Jim
Tony
who?
Robbins' mentor. So he's like a generation before Tony Robbins. But if you Google
What's
him,
his name again?
Jim Rohn. So it's Jim like Jim, and then Rohn is ROH.
Oh yeah. Yes, I actually have been listening to Jim Rohn. I like how he talks.
Oh yeah,
Like
he's great.
you. Yeah, I just didn't know his name, but I've been
Right,
listening
right.
to him. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
great.
Mm-hmm.
So, as far as wrestling, were you a fan of it growing up? I understand you were a fan of the Ultimate Warrior, who people love on this channel.
Yes, definitely. So I didn't, growing up, I mean, remember, this is back in the day. We had, especially in Germany, like cable wasn't as widespread as it is now, and it wasn't as widespread as I'm sure it was here sooner. We had three channels for a lot of my childhood. So we had three and then maybe four or five channels up until I was like 15. So I didn't have a chance to watch wrestling, but I'd seen wrestling written about and talked about in like some of those teen magazines. And the articles were written as if it was all real, and I believed it. So I must be about 8 or 9 or whatever when Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior were doing a big face off for WrestleMania, and they wrote an article about it, and I was so fascinated with it, just with the mystery around this character. And I thought, oh my God, nobody knows who he is or where he's come from. I believed that. So for me, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then later, once we finally got cable when I was a teenager, I was like, okay, I have to watch this. So, and then I started watching it. But of course, growing up in a household where violence wasn't necessarily something that like my mom wanted us to watch. So I'm watching wrestling and I'm so fascinated by these larger than life characters, but I'm also kind of shrinking from the violence that's happening. So I told my friend the next day at school, and he was like, well, it's not real, right? They're just pretending. And I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever heard. And so after that, I could watch it guilt free. And this is when I became a really big fan.
Someone also mentioned in the comments that the Ultimate Warrior was a motivational speaker too, and he has his injections of inspirations online. Any thoughts on those videos if you've seen them?
Oh, that's cool. No, I haven't. So maybe I have to check that out.
Oh, they're very interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty much promos of the Ultimate Warrior, but they're motivational promos. They're actually pretty good.
Okay, nice. That sounds intriguing for sure.
Did you get to meet him ever?
I got to meet him once at a signing of some kind, but I didn't have a long conversation with him. It was more kind of like a shaking his hand, thanking him, telling him I was a big fan, that kind of thing. So not like a real conversation.
Someone's asking what was better when you were younger, WWE or TNA? I guess
That's
WCW may have been the one that was competitive at that time, maybe.
I mean, ECW was part of WWE when I was there. So I would put that under the same umbrella, as it were. Um, I guess for me, I also felt like looking back, I liked TNA because in TNA I felt more like I had a storyline that went for an entire year. Obviously I got to be champion, if that means anything. But I got to be, this cool character. I got to be, have one consistent storyline for a whole year that went from week to week to week. And I really enjoyed that. And the atmosphere at TNA was always great. And I was a big fan of TNA, so I was like very excited to finally get there. Um, WWE, I have a lot of memories of being frustrated because a lot of the storylines that was started with me and Paul got cut short. So we had a really cool storyline. I thought we were starting with William Regal, and then that got cut short. So he was taken off the road for a while. Then we had something going on with Ken Kennedy that we were enjoying. Then he got drafted to SmackDown. This is when we were still on Raw. Then in ECW, we started a storyline with Boogeyman. Again, that ended. So it was just a lot of stopping and starting. And then towards the end, they weren't using me much. So I have a lot of like insight in hindsight. I've kind of colored that experience with a lot of, disappointment or frustration. But if I really look back at the whole thing, and really appreciate all the experiences that we did have, the traveling that we did do, the different the cool matches and the cool story. Even if it was half storylines, we got to walk out and have a storyline with Ken Kennedy. We got to come out and be sort of in William Regal's stable. We got to work with the Hurricane. That was another awesome moment. So we did have some really great moments there as well. So I feel like it's hard to put them against each other because the experiences were so different. But I would say that's kind of my impression of each one.
What do you think about the possibility? You probably don't follow wrestling as closely now, but it looks like WWE might be absorbing TNA. They're airing right now under the Endeavor streaming platform, which owns WWE and UFC, and they're doing talent crossovers. And now they've pretty much released almost all of their behind the scenes people in TNA. There's no events booked past August. So it's looking like there might be a takeover or some sort of very close working relationship.
To be honest with you, my initial reaction is, oh no. Not that I have a crystal ball, I could tell that it would be good or not. I did like, because I noticed, I think Jordan Grace went to NXT with her TNA belt, I believe, if I'm correct about that. And then I know Mickie James was able to go to the Royal Rumble again with her TNA belt. So I noticed there was a little bit back and forth, which I think that's fantastic. I love it when, big companies work together in that way and do exchanges. But in terms of TNA being absorbed, I'm a little bit skeptical because I thought TNA always had such a unique expression of itself, and it was so different. And I would worry a little bit that that gets lost if that gets taken over by WWE and be kind of put under that umbrella. Unless it's a question of that, just it's a cash injection and they can still run their own thing, then that would be fine, of course. To be honest, I always am a little bit puzzled why. I feel like out of the, I'm going to say three big, if you come, there's WWE and then there's AEW, that's more like the direct competition as many people see it. I've never quite understood why TNA, once it sort of went down in the ranks, not of quality, but visibility, why that's never really recovered and been like a real competition. Because I feel like out of all the products, TNA is still potentially, for me, or an Impact, even when it was Impact, like towards the end, was possibly the most exciting promotion in terms of content and storylines and wrestling styles and characters. I don't know if you feel a similar way. But I never understood why it didn't become a bigger deal again. So I always thought that was a shame. So maybe
I
this will
think
help.
the
Who knows?
it might help because I think the reason is now WWE's main roster minimum salary is 350,000 a year. That just came out. AEW is paying so much. I just don't think Anthem can compete with the money offers that are being made by the big companies. So who knows?
I mean, if they can carry on with the creative. I mean, I haven't watched it recently, but from the second time that I was there and from everything that I saw around that time, I thought it was so exciting. So if they can continue with having that creative separate and keep it in that vein, then I think that could be great.
Well, they released their head of creative last week, so that might tell you something about that. But we won't go too far down that road. As far as La Femme Nikita, I don't think it ever aired in Canada, but we would always see it advertised on Raw. I understand you were a big fan of that show and named yourself after the main character of that. Could you tell us a little bit about that show?
I do, and it's interesting because Rory Dupree, who played Michael, who was Nikita's male counterpart, he's Canadian. I think he's French Canadian, I assume. But yes, I was a huge fan of her. I thought it was the greatest show. I thought she was so cool. It was like aspiring to be with her in a lot of ways. And so actually when I started wrestling, when I had my very first match, I called myself Kat. And that was originally, I mean, I don't know if I would have done something a little bit more elaborate with that name, but that was originally, I was calling myself Kat when I first came out. And then that was right when Miss Kitty changed her name to the Cat. That was literally happened after my very first match. So then I sort of went, okay, I guess I need a new name. And then I thought, okay, Nikita. So I became Nikita, and then I was Nikita for the entire time that I wrestled in Europe. I was there when I started at Hammerlock and then FWA, and then also when I went around Europe, a few different promotions out there.
Did you ever wrestle for Brian Dixon?
I did a couple of times, but I wasn't like a main staple on his roster or anything.
Yeah, I wrestled for him before. I didn't like it very much, but I
Uh-huh.
also understand you wrestled Paige's mom a bunch of times in Europe.
Yeah, so when I started wrestling, I mean there was two female wrestlers in the country besides me when I was just starting. So I wasn't really a wrestler yet. So there was Soraya and there was Klondike Kate. Um, yeah, Paige's mom, her wrestling name was Sweet Soraya. So yeah, so we wrestled a couple of times, but it wasn't like a lot because the promotions. It was all a little bit back then in England. The promotions all kind of kept themselves to themselves a lot, and they weren't really sharing rosters as much as they do here, or as I'm sure they do now. It was a little bit like, oh, you can't work for those others, you know. So mainly I worked for Hammerlock first exclusively, and then pretty much exclusively for FWA after that. So our paths didn't cross that much, but I wrestled her like 2, 3 times.
Did you ever wrestle in Ireland?
Sorry?
Did you ever wrestle in Ireland?
Yes, but I wrestled in Ireland with WWE. So that was later.
Oh, okay. How did you end up going to the US? Was that being recruited by WWE or did you go over on your own?
Now that was with WWE. So it actually WWE was holding on their website. You could apply to go to a tryout, and they were doing these open tryouts in different cities. And I just saw it advertised and thought, oh, I'll throw my hat in the ring. So I applied on the website, and then I went up to Manchester when WWE came over, and it was Kurt Angle and Shelton Benjamin were holding the tryout there, and it was a bunch of us. We just did some stuff in the ring, and then I never heard anything back after that. A few months later, I was at an independent show in England, and I bumped into Tommy Dreamer, who was wrestling on the show, and he asked me about it. And I said, well, I didn't hear anything. And he said, well, if we come back, or if WWE comes back, give me a call, and we'll get you another tryout. So I said, thank you very much. And then when WWE came back over to London this time, I called him and said, can I come for another tryout? And he goes, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I'll book you for both days and, we'll get you paid. And I'm like, paid? Bonus. I didn't know I was getting booked as an extra, as it were. But I didn't get on the show or anything like that. But we did get to work out in the ring a little bit. And then Johnny Ace watched and then decided to hire me on that day.
How was your experience overall with Johnny Ace since he's been in the news a lot lately?
I mean, honestly, I always liked him. I didn't experience anything untoward. I didn't find him unpleasant to be around. It was very businesslike with me, but he always had like a sense of humor about him. So I always enjoyed him. As far as my interactions went, which wasn't very deep in terms of, we never had like a long conversation. It was always just very business and professional. So.
So how was your experience in the
Sorry, I lost your audio for a minute. I can't hear you at all. Is that my... I don't know if it's the internet, but I
how is
lost you.
no. Can you hear me now?
Yes. There's a lot of static, but I can hear you. So.
All right, I won't take myself out again. Sorry to the fans. I know you'd rather see her full screen than me. But how was your experience in developmental for WWE?
I I liked it. Generally speaking, I would say that. I mean, first of all, Al Snow is an amazing world of knowledge, and I learned a ton from him, from watching him work and everything like that. What I really, really enjoyed about OVW was, again, we had consistent storylines, and what I just enjoyed like the creative aspect of it just as much, or maybe more, even than the physical wrestling. So for me, it was cool that we got to, we'd have a show, we discuss the show, everything like that, and then afterwards we could go to Al and be like, "Hey, Al, I have an idea for next week." We could pitch him things, and later in WWE, I would pitch the writers things, and they kind of just would look at me and be like, "Okay, thank you," and then that was the end of the conversation. I never heard anything about that idea again. But with Al, it was like he would always have a response, like one way or another. He might say like, "That's a terrible idea," or he might say, "That's a great idea," or he might say, "It's a good idea, but this doesn't work about it," and then he would always explain what didn't work and how it could be improved or how it could make better, and especially from a wrestling standpoint, from a heat standpoint, and how to create more heat rather than just thinking of it as a this happens and this happens, but like how do we build so that people want to see the match. So that was a really great experience in that sense creatively. So I really enjoyed that a lot, and I got to wrestle with some awesome girls, women, whilst I was there. So
Who was your group of friends that you would hang out with in development?
I mean, who was my group of friends? Well, so I was really good friends with Jennifer Thomas. I don't know if you know her. She wasn't on a contract, but she was wrestling there and like training there and everything like that. Serena Deep was out there. We always got along great. Beth, of course, Beth Phoenix was there. She was fantastic. Sean Spears was, a buddy of mine. John Boland. I don't know, just it kind of, yeah, it was like everybody kind of grouped together.
I see. Was there much politics in OVW at that time, or was it pretty friendly?
I mean, it was a little bit like cliquey, I would say. It was like some people that sort of looked over their shoulder, watching what everybody else is doing. But I think generally speaking, it was pretty friendly.
Was Jim Cornette still around at that time, or was that after he had left?
That was after. So I never met him, and I never got to work with Paul Heyman either, which I thought was a shame because it sounded like he was also like an awesome person to learn from.
What
But
was
we
the
did,
process like? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
uh, no, we did have some really good, guest trainers, like Dr. Death and people like that came in. So
Was Nova the head of talent relations at that time for development talent,
yes,
or was it Drew? Yeah, okay. How was it working with him?
I mean, he never really came down, you know. Once in a while, he would come down and watch the talent and interact, and he was always cool to be around. So, but he wasn't like there on a day-to-day basis. Like he wasn't in Louisville, or maybe he was in Louisville, but he didn't come like to the school, you know.
Yeah, yeah. He lives in Louisville now, I think. That's
Right.
when I met him. So, what was the process like of getting called up to the main roster?
So we done a little showcase at OVW for the writers. They'd come down one day and they put on a little evening of wrestling matches or day of wrestling matches, whatever it was. And then they had put me as Paul Burchill's valet. And we probably, I don't know if we cut a little promo together or not, but I came out, with him, and I kind of went, huh, that was cool. That felt right. Shortly after that, I got called. There was a European tour, and somebody had dropped out, got injured, or similar, and so they needed another girl to just be in the girls' tag match. So they put me onto the road for that, and then it was I teamed with Victoria, aka Lisa Marie. She's amazing, by the way. Obviously, she's amazing as a wrestler and performer, but she's also an amazing person. She took me under her wing and was just so friendly and took good care of me and everything like that. So that was a really awesome time. So we were just on the road for a couple of weeks. And then when we came back, we had one day where we went to Raw, and I just got to be backstage. I didn't do anything. And then I talked to, I think Michael Hayes about, because he'd come down for the showcase. And I said, what do you guys think about, me and Paul Burchill doing a thing together? And that's sort of when the idea was born, more or less. And then they asked us to do a couple promos for them to look at. And then they thought, yeah, let's do that.
Do you have any stories about Michael Hayes? Because he seems like he's quite the character.
Unfortunately, not. I feel like I should.
I guess when you had a memorable angle. People talk about it all the time, but I guess you don't like develop closer relationships with the agents and writers until you're higher up on the card. Is that how it works?
In terms of how close you get to them.
Well, yeah, in terms of like a buddy to be buddy with like Michael Hayes or one of those guys, would you have to be up higher on the card?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, we were, like you say, we weren't that high on the card to where you really become, to where they really listen to you a lot and want your input and want to be buddies with you and stuff like that. So I'm sure, I missed out on some of the the stories, if you will.
So, uh, I'll be honest, I wasn't watching around the time that this angle happened, but I remember hearing about it. Was this something that was pitched to you right away and you started, I guess it was an incest related angle, or was it something where you just started managing him as the sister and it developed into that after someone saw you together and had the idea?
No, it was supposed to be right away. So that was like the original idea behind the gimmick was that, and we actually had a meeting about it of how to resolve it, because we're going to start off teasing that dynamic, and then we were going to have a reveal to where either we're just stepbrother and sister, so we're not actually blood related, so that part is okay, or the other way, that we were just kind of teasing that maybe we were sexually involved, but we weren't actually sexually involved. So it was one of those two ways that we were going to go, because it wasn't going to be actually, brother and sister sleeping together. It was going to just tease that aspect of it and then go a slightly different way. But I guess the sponsors got wind of it and they didn't like it, or they were just trying to be more PG at that time. So they nixed that pretty quickly.
How far did it get? Like we see kissing in WWE today with Liv Morgan's doing an angle with Dominic Mysterio. Was there kissing back then with you and Paul on
No,
camera?
they never had us do
No.
that.
Do you find as an actress, like I know it's different in acting than wrestling, as an actress and a wrestler, would you find it any different having to do like a makeout angle on Raw, for instance, compared to being cast in a movie where you're never going to see this guy again after you do this angle or the shoot the scene? Would it be any different to you, or would you consider both? It's only acting. It's not going to be awkward at all after. Because I know in wrestling there's a lot of ribbing, so it might to me be a little bit tougher if you have to do something like that in wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you said it, like in wrestling, you're essentially, you run away with a circus, so you're around the same people over and over and over again. Whereas you go and do a film, you might not see the person again, so it might be different. But I think honestly, if you're in that position, you are acting, and I mean, it wouldn't bother me either way. So it would just really depend on if the other person was uncomfortable with it, or had whatever feelings of not liking the idea of doing that with me. So for me, it doesn't really make a huge difference. It's kind of like more of a clinical thing. But I think too,
We
because not every wrestler comes to wrestling from a performance angle. Some wrestlers also come to it more from a athlete/sport angle. So if you go into acting, you'll probably at some point have a romantic scene, you might have to kiss somebody, you might have to be physically active with that person. Whereas in wrestling, I mean, I guess there's some expectation that could happen, but it's also not the first thing on your mind. So I feel like maybe there's more people that would perhaps shy away from that. I don't know.
And actually, that brings up a point that I never thought of too. I'm not a good actor, but I've done some. But you can always read a script or when you get an audition and be like, oh, there's a makeout scene in here. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm not doing it. But if you did that in WWE, would you be in violation of your contract? I guess
I mean,
if you
probably.
refuse to do something.
I think in WWE they might ask you to do worse things than just kiss somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, especially back during the Attitude Era specifically, there's a lot of girls who had to do stuff that's like way worse than making out with somebody.
I just wonder because there was a thing where Vince McMahon for a while was booking himself making out with various divas, including Sable. So that would be would you have been comfortable with that? You seem like you're very professional, but would you be like, wow, this guy's technically writing this stuff and he's booking himself making out with all these beautiful women?
I mean, I think that I probably would have looked at it like, I don't know that this is appropriate, for him to do that. Because I think if you're ahead of the company and you're booking yourself in those angles, it's very suspect. And I would say the same thing about films. I always see, little indie films where the producer director casts himself as the lead, even though they might not really be right for the lead, and then with whatever hot young love interest that they want to make out with, so it has that kind of same connotation that I feel like that takes away from being a professional and having the best interest of the entertainment that you're producing at heart, and I would question, honest, I mean, I would question Vince's motives for doing that, for booking himself in those angles, aside from that he really thought that was the very best idea for an entertaining show that he could come up with.
Yeah, because with Sable in particular, she had sued them, and then when she came back to work, it almost seemed like that would have been a punishment. It's like, oh, you want to come back? Well, you're going to be booked in this angle. I think she was also making out with or kissing Zach Gowen and stuff, which is
Right.
harmless.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like sometimes. Did you ever notice punishment stuff happening in wrestling? They always deny it, but there's examples of it that we see of people kind of being punished in storylines
Yeah.
for
I don't
whatever
think I've
reason.
personally experienced, but I've definitely heard stories about that.
And you mentioned Victoria, who I've interviewed, and of course she ended up being one of the most respected women backstage, and she is a great person. But when I interviewed her, she was saying as a rookie backstage, and she even said in this she went out of her way to make new women feel comfortable, and you're collaborating that before I'm even bringing it up. But she said she felt very uncomfortable and kind of entering a Shark Tank when she first walked into that Divas locker room. Did you experience anything like that, or were the girls pretty nice to you overall?
I didn't really experience that. I feel like the girls were generally pretty nice and respectful. Um, I had a little bit of you know, everybody has a little bit of that, walking on eggshells feeling when they first come in, regardless. There's always like all these etiquettes and respect things that you have to observe, and you have to make sure that you don't cross certain lines. On the flip side, for me personally, I'm sure for her it was different, but for me personally, I might have also projected that to an extent, because sometimes it also depends on, how do you feel walking in. You might imagine that it's going to be a shark tank, so you perceive it to be a shark tank, even when it's not necessarily. And I'm not saying it was like that for Victoria, because I think that probably as time, because I think we've seen that from way back in the day when wrestling first started towards now, it's improved so much that she probably had much more of that when she went in. And I already probably had a lot less of that Shark Tank experience. So I'm not what I'm saying is I'm not invalidating that she had that experience. I'm just saying that for me personally, I may have projected that a little bit, but I also didn't feel like anybody was mean to me or anything like that. But Victoria was very noticeably always specifically nurturing and supportive and helping the younger talent. So that was noticeable that she wanted to do that for us. So that was, really special.
Here's a question that you probably can't answer. Why have you been off wrestling TV for so long when they always bring back legends like yourself?
Um, I mean, I guess I wasn't so high on the card. I didn't make that much of an impact at WWE. I think I had a lot of storylines that came and went, and then towards the end I was just appearing once in a while. So it wasn't like, I'm not like a Mickey James or a Victoria or a Trish that was there for an extended period of time, that was really like a big star, as I say. So I think probably that's why, because I would show up now, nobody would know who I am, whereas Mickey James will show up and the crowd will go wild. you know
How was working with Mickey James, by the way?
Amazing. She's also one of those people that will always help the younger talent, and that's also especially important when it comes to in-ring work, because she's not selfish that way, because she always wants the other person always also to shine. Even if, like, when I first started working with her, of course, I'm much newer. She's already a huge star and everything like that, so I'm a little bit shy about saying, can I do this or can I do that? She was always encouraging me, like, hey, let's get some of your shit in. Let's showcase you a little bit more. Let's do some stuff for yourself. And then outside of that, she's just an amazing, such a warm-hearted, kind, beautiful person. I mean, I think that everybody notices that when they meet her. She's just radiant. So that was
What
amazing.
about the Bellas? How were they?
The Bellas were great. So they were very green still when I was there, and I did get to work with them a couple of times on ECW. And I always had the impression that they were very humble and they worked really hard and they wanted to improve, and they knew what their strengths were and their weaknesses, and they always wanted to get better. And it didn't feel like they weren't arrogant about it. So yeah, they were lovely to work with. Sure.
What about Maurice?
Maurice is awesome too. I always really enjoyed Maurice. She's very cool. She's a very cool, laid back person. She's very smart, and I feel like she always had a good business head on her shoulders. But she was always cool to hang out with. Enjoyable to hang out with. So.
What about Kelly Kelly?
Who's sorry?
Kelly Kelly.
Kelly, very sweet. I didn't have like a huge amount of interaction with her at the time, but OVW a little bit more. It's when she was like really sad, but she went on the road pretty quickly when I was there, and she was on doing the ECW thing. But she's always been very sweet to me.
Was Melina around at your time?
Yeah, so Melina, she was on the road. So we did a loop of house shows together, and I actually got to wrestle her at one time. Well, I got to wrestle again later on the indie scene, but at WWE that one time we had like one weekend of house show loops, and I got to do like house show singles matches with her, and she always puts like 120% effort in. She always wanted to have let's have the best match that we possibly like. We would drive into the house shows like separately, and she would be texting me like ideas for the show. Nobody else was doing that for the house. You would just show up an hour before and be like, hey, what should we do? But she was always like, she's so passionate about it. It was very inspiring.
And she's one of the nicest people I've met in wrestling. She's a very nice person, I find, as well.
Yeah, she's very sweet. I really enjoy her too.
You talk about her texting you to set up matches. Was most of the matches pretty choreographed in WWE, or if you were wrestling a bigger star like a Mickey James, for instance, would they have more creative freedom to call stuff on the fly?
No, we always well. So it depends if it's like a house show match or if it's a TV match, right? So on a house show match, you pretty much it's up to you. You just do whatever they give you your time. They tell you who's gonna win and who's gonna lose, and then you just do whatever you want to do. So like, and then you would tell the agent, and the agent would approve or disapprove. So like me and Melina, we would put together a match, and then we would run it by the agent, and then they would say okay. Or if they thought something wasn't good, they'd be tweak it or something. But usually on the house shows, it's pretty much you just do it. But like on the TV matches, it was a little bit different because the matches have to not only be whatever decently choreographed wrestling matches, they tell a specific story a lot of the time, or there's a specific thing that they want to get across. For example, you know, I'm wrestling the Bella twins. They want the Bella twins to shine. And then the most important thing was, the twin switch at the end, because that was the gimmick. So it would be very specific sometimes about like what how many moves I would do versus how many moves they would do. And plus, let's face it, at that time girls didn't get a lot of time, for wrestling. Only
That's
one
true.
overall, obviously you'd have like bigger storylines between two bigger stars. You have Mickey and Trish fighting each other, or Melina Cool doing an unbelievable pay-per-view match, and get a little bit more time to showcase their talents and things like that. But a lot of the matches that I did on TV were pretty short. So and then
Did you
and then
ever
you
wrestle
have a little.
Trish?
I never did, no.
Okay. But sorry, you were saying the TV matches are short, but you have a little bit more time on house shows.
Yeah, so it always depends because on house shows you never have a 3 minute match. Whereas on a TV show you might have a 3 minute match, whereas 6 minute tag.
Do you have a favorite match from your time in WWE?
um, I mean, outside of honestly, like those matches with Melina were some of my favorite matches. Um, and then of course, I guess with wrestling Mickey at Night of Champions is one of my favorite. Just not so much the match, to be honest. I think we actually had a better rematch on Raw like the week after. For me personally, from my input, I like that much better. But just wrestling her for the title on a pay-per-view and everything like that was just an awesome experience. So that would be like one of my favorites.
Very cool. Here's a funny question. Any female locker room fights that you witnessed?
Only like for backstage vignettes. I remember in TNA I got to fight Mickey James in the locker room. So I just remember like I was whipping her with my belt. I threw her into like a garbage can. So, but that actually then spilled into the ring. So I don't know if that counts.
Someone wants to know any interactions with Stephanie Shane or Linda McMahon.
Yeah. So Stephanie, like I want to say not quite a bit, like in terms of that we had long conversations again. But Stephanie was, I think, the head writer at the time, so I would at times, go to her and pitch something, and she would always say hi, or every now and then we'd be doing a vignette, and she would be part of the producing team for the backstage vignette, so she would be around. So a little bit more with Stephanie. Shane, I think one time I think that was like at the initial meeting about mine and Paul's gimmick. I think we had Vince, Shane, and Stephanie and Hunter, maybe, just talking about where the gimmick was going to go, kind of thing. Um, I feel like I must have met Linda at some point just to shake her hand, but I never really spoke to her. So.
So eventually, I guess you just got released during cuts or something, no real specific reason, and then you ended up going to TNA. But I understand you wanted to go to TNA anyways, as you had mentioned. Could you tell us about that transition?
Yeah, so, I mean, basically at that time in WWE, they weren't using me very much. So I was sitting around a lot, reading, frustrated. So it wasn't really a surprise when they released me. In some ways, it was a relief because I felt like I would rather not be in limbo. I pitched a bunch of ideas and nothing really seemed to stick. So I just felt like I don't know that anything's going to happen here. So when they released me, I was like, okay, at least I have a decision on that and I can do something else. So I pretty much, I think, immediately called, was it Terry Taylor that was in charge at the time, and said, hey, can I go? And they said, oh, call us back in 90 days because right now we can't even, talk to you. And then 90 days later, we talked, and then they brought me in pretty much right away. Well, as soon as I got my new visa, because I had to get a new visa.
Did you come up with the winter name and gimmick, or was that something that was pitched to you when you arrived?
Came up with that entire thing. So that was all his creation, right down to the white streak in my hair. Even though, I mean, the outfits I went and got myself. So that was my fashion design.
Now, Vince Russo's on this channel a lot. There's lots of negative and positive about him. How was your experience with him? He was good overall with divas, I think. Everyone has different experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I love working with him. Um, I thought he was great. I thought he was a great person. Um, I've chatted to him once in a while since then, and I admired him or admire him still, you know, especially for everything that he really has achieved in the business. I mean, you could criticize some of the things that came out of his creative mind, but like as a whole, I think, his body of work kind of speaks for himself. I mean, he was revolutionary in a lot of ways. So I think that the wrestling business also owes him some
He was
gratitude.
booking TNA during its most popular period and best rated period, I think.
Yeah.
Now, what was it like? I think you were there when Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan came in. What was that transition like behind the scenes?
I mean, it wasn't so much noticeable in terms of backstage or what we were doing and stuff like that. For me, I think I was disappointed about the rebrand because I liked the six-sided ring. I liked the cross the line. I liked the way that it was branded. I felt like going to the blue and white and calling it Impact watered down the image a little bit. I thought it was edgier before, and for me personally, I would have liked to just continue the way it was. So, but yeah, backstage, I personally didn't notice too much of a change, but I was also really new there, so I wouldn't have necessarily even known what had changed.
And of course, they went head to head at one point during that with WWE. I think it was against Raw or was it SmackDown? One of the two brands. What was the expectation there when they decided to go head to head? Obviously, they thought it was going to turn out better, but did they put a lot of pressure on the talent?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Like, were you there when they started going head to head with WWE? I think it was either Raw or SmackDown. They moved Impact, so it was head to head.
Oh, um, I feel like I might have even when they went on the same time slot, like they went live or whatever it was.
Yeah, as Raw, someone's pointing out they went head to head with Raw, and they thought that was going to be the key to reigniting the Monday Night Wars.
I feel like I must have been around. I don't know why I can't really specifically remember that, particularly outside of the fact that I didn't think it was a great idea.
Did
So,
you have much interaction with Hulk Hogan?
I met him on occasion, like just backstage, walking by, saying hi, how are you, but not really on a conversation basis.
Why do you think it didn't work out better when they brought Hulk Hogan in? Because initially it did get a buzz, but it seemed like he wasn't like talking about it when he would do other appearances. It seemed like he wasn't fully behind it 100%. Do you think it was that, or or other reasons why it didn't pop as much as everybody expected it to when Hogan jumped aboard?
I mean, I just think for me, I felt when when I was growing up and I sort of, the wrestling came into my periphery and I started watching and everything like that. I always looked at WCW with some, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and stuff. I always felt like WWE had the newer talent; it was more cutting edge, and that was already, in the '90s. So I feel like that perhaps they overestimated the fandom for Hulk Hogan still to at that time, or the nostalgia, or how much people were willing to perceive him as like still this huge star, which of course he's like, his legendary status is never going to die because he's that big, and he was, for a lot of people, when I used to, especially in Germany where WWE isn't so as big as here, it's not as much part of the culture. If I tried to explain what wrestling is and I'd say like WWE, they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" If I said Hulk Hogan, they knew what I was talking about. So he will always have that. He's synonymous with pro wrestling. He will always have that huge legendary status. But I think for fans watching, to have him as part of the brand or not part of the brand isn't as big of a deal in terms of them wanting to watch it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Was Lacey Von Erich around at all when you were there?
I met Lacey Von. I feel like I met her once briefly right at the beginning, and then she wasn't around anymore. And I think I met her again one time later at a signing or something. She was always lovely, but I really couldn't say that I know her well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm friends with her. She's quite a character. Somebody wants to know, he says you're friends with Timeless Tony Storm. What do you think about the big push and all of her success in AEW?
Oh, I don't know her that well. I met her once. We wrestled each other once in England. That was really cool. She was really cool. I think it's fantastic that she's had all this success. She had a huge buzz around her before she even went to WWE, and a lot of people seem to really love this character that she's doing with the old tiny Hollywood, the Marilyn Monroe type character. So I think that's really um, inspired and unique and funny. So I'm happy for her.
What would it take to get you back in wrestling? Is there anything that could bring you back from acting back into the wrestling business?
$1 million. I mean, honestly, for me, so I wrestled a long time, and I have certain things to where every now and then I get a stiff neck and things like that, where I'm like, okay, I can still do it, but it's not worth me wrestling in the indie scene, because if something else happens to my neck, or if I break a bone now, or if I tear a tendon now, like, it's just not worth it, because at this point I'm not having a career in wrestling. I'm very focused. Like I said, I'm very focused on filmmaking. So I would absolutely love to be a wrestling valet / manager, something like that. So if anybody wants to book me for that, I'm very, for small amounts of money, I'm completely available. But in terms of getting in the ring and wrestling, yeah, that's probably a done deal, I would say. Outside of,
Very
like I said, $1 million,
interesting.
because that would, obviously change my life.
Now, a bunch of fans want me to ask you this. For whatever reason, it's on your Wikipedia that you are a pansexual. How did this get on your Wikipedia? And I don't even know what that is. Is this true, or could you explain what that is? If
That's a
if
what,
it's
sorry?
even true. It says on your Wikipedia that you're a pansexual, whatever, which I've never even heard that term before.
Really? Get with the times, Hannibal. I think it's an expression that Miley Cyrus made famous. It just means that basically you're attracted to all genders.
Oh, okay. All right. I just haven't heard that word used for it, I guess. I guess
Yeah.
I should get cable. I'm just on YouTube, just watch YouTube. Very good. Well, I want to close this down, but I just have to ask you about acting for someone that hasn't seen any of your movies but finds you charming or something from watching this. What movies that you've been in or shows would you recommend that they look up?
Um, I would recommend Karate Kill. You could watch Medcon 1, which is a zombie film. Um, but also, watch out for my upcoming feature, which will hopefully be out in a year or two. At the moment, it's called Ensnared, but that could still change. So look out for that.
And I understand you played a wolf in one movie.
Yes, Amityville Moon. Oops, I gave it
That's
away.
pretty cool. Oh, that's okay. Oops. Very
Spoiler alert.
interesting. Someone's asking on here, where can they follow you on social media?
So my Instagram and Twitter, and now Threads as well. My username is Katarina's Infamy, which is my first name Katarina, Sinfamy. So yeah, that's it basically.
Very good. Well, very good information in this. I really enjoyed hearing your story. And I'll let you close this down with whatever you want to tell the fans. Best of luck to you with your acting and filmmaking endeavors.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for watching. This has been really fun. Thank you for all your awesome questions and being interested in what I'm doing. Thank you also for your support over the years, not just for me, but for wrestling in general, and specifically, obviously, women's wrestling. And you've allowed it to come as far as it has, and so it's blossoming now in the way that we're seeing, which is amazing to see. It's so different from when I started, and it's really wonderful. So thank you all for that. I hope you keep loving it and keep enjoying it, and we'll speak to you soon.